So welcome to day 9 on Learn Code and Create. So in our previous lesson, we started learning CSS, through which we learned the basics of connecting the CSS to our HTML document and writing some basic CSS rules to affect the HTML elements. So in today's lesson, I would like us to go further again in CSS by trying to understand how the CSS actually sees the HTML elements. How does it perceive it and how is it able to manipulate it? What is the actual nature of the HTML elements to CSS and how can CSS affect it in different ways? So I went on to create my day 9 folder here in our Lance course project and then created a sample project which is here. So when we open the project, we have this. So I can zoom it a little bit for you to see. So what I want us to start from today is to discover a principle called the CSS model box, or the box model in some terms. So what is it and how is it important? If you might recall in our previous lesson, I mentioned that the browser actually lays out our elements in kind of either inline or either block. So I drew something yesterday by illustrating that aspect, and I said that some of the tags just display inline, like you could see in this case here. You see that the list element, the menu elements or the A elements we use here, they are aligning themselves one after the other. But whenever we use a heading tag like this one here, it kind of occupies the whole space and does not allow anything else to come next to it except after it. So the same thing goes with the paragraph. You can see it occupies this whole line and then goes on and forces the rest to come to the next line. So this is a concept we call inlining or block. So the A elements here used in this navigation are inline elements. So we call them inline tags, and then the paragraphs and then the headings like these ones are all block tags. So block tags. So basically this block here stands for the kind of block they generate, right? So that's the idea there. Now I would like us to go deep in this concept and actually see what exactly the browser does. So in order to achieve that, let me cheat a little bit and write a small CSS on our page and actually see what the browser sees. So I will open my source code, my code, using my text editor. So for these examples, we are going to use an embedded CSS. So I'm going to use my star tag and then go in between the star tag and start writing my CSS. Yesterday, remember, we learned this CSS class called the universal selector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select every single element in the document and then I will give it a border. So I will actually ask them to display their limits. I want to ask every single element on the document to show me their borders. Where do they start? Where do they end? So that we can actually see the boxes for every single element on the document. So bear with me. I'm just going to write this. You might not know what it means, but I'm just writing it. So border 1 pixel solid, and I want it to look, they have a color of tomato. So once I write this little rule of CSS, I can go and preview our document and see what we get. Wow. So here you can see that CSS indeed is actually boxing every single thing. So you can see the box in which the CSS model box or the box model text lies. So you can see that box goes right to the end of the document. You can even see the document, the body tag itself here. So this tick thing we see here, that's the body tag, and the other one above it is actually the HTML tag. So you can see every single element in the document is in the box. If you look at the boxes in which the element, the navigation elements are. You can see there are little boxes around the text themselves, and in the code we have the nav element that surrounds them. So you can see that nav element being used here as well, and that's what contains them. So next to it we have the paragraph, and you can see it also resides in the box, and so on. Every single thing CSS actually sees it as a box, and that's what we call in CSS the box model or the model box. So either way it is fine. So now what is the point? What is the point of knowing this? There is an important concept. So if basically we can know that, if basically we know that every single element is in a box, so by affecting this box, it means we could also affect how the element is laid out on the document. So what I'm trying to say is that if we know that this is a box that goes up to here, what if we will reduce this box width to some point here or so? What can happen? So if we decide like, okay, these ones that are in small boxes like this, what if we extend the boxes? What happens? So that's what we use to actually change the display, to change the flow in which the document, in which our elements appear on our page, therefore creating design through it. So talking about flow, you can also see that the elements flow from the top, bottom, following each other. See, they are following one after the other. This is a very important concept to also notice. So if we can affect the box of the elements, if we can affect these boxes, then we can also be able to affect the design, the layout of our websites. So this is the first thing. These are the things we are going to explore. So the first things we are going to look at around the box is the box life. I will call it that way. The life of a box, or what actually characterize the box, what determines the box. So if we look at this box of the heading one here, so let me bring this. So if we take this heading one here, let me change the color into something like this. Taking this heading one here, or heading to whatever the heading we use here, we can see that there's a spacing between it and the next elements here. There's also some spacing between it and other elements over there. Here we can see that there's no spacing, or the space is not that much. And also at the other side, we can see the spacing is not that much. In addition to that, you can see with the text within the box. So let me, okay, I couldn't zoom. So the space between the box, inner space, the inner space of the box, and then the text inside, there's some space in there. So here too, you can see there's some space here. There's a space here. There's another space down here, and so there's another space inside here, and this side probably there's some space. So in these four side corners, we can see that the element is affected somehow. So what we could see, so what I just illustrated is that we have the text here, which is the big text we have. Then we could notice that the text, the box in which the text is, there's some space outside of it. In the four sides like this, there's some space there, and here too there's some space, except I didn't do the arrow well. So here too there's some space, and we also notice that there's another space here within the box itself, between the text and the edges of the box, right? So like this. Also at the both sides, the four sides, so like this. So these elements are very important in how the box behaves. The spaces outside, these spaces outside are actually called the margins. These spaces are called the margins. So it means if we could affect the margins of the box, we can affect how it displays. So an example, let's see how we can do that. So in our case, we are dealing with the heading one. So let's target this heading one and then write something about its margin. So what I'm going to do is I will use this CSS rule called margin left, because we could notice that the margins exist in the four corners of the box: the top, right, bottom, and left. So it means we could actually pinpoint each one of these margins and do something to them. So I'm going to say the margin top, and then I will set the distance that margin top should have. So let's say I will say it should be some 20 pixels. So if I refresh the document, you see something a little bit changed. So let me increase it and to something bigger and see what happens. So you see the margin at the top side of the box has increased. This is basically what it means to space something. So if we wanted more space between this box and then the edge of our web document, it means we would simply affect the margin top of it and make it happen, right? So what if I say margin bottom as well, and I make it another 60 pixels? What happens? You see, it is cleared. So we could actually use this and clear our elements and make them look beautiful. So it is actually the sign that by simply manipulating this box behavior or this box characteristics, we can start producing designs. And it is the core of designing on web pages. It is the core of everything beautiful on web pages. So by doing so, we could continue affecting every single box characteristic, the margin, and so on. So going back to the drawing box, we can also see that we have the padding. So if we have the padding, the same thing goes. We could decide to affect the padding left, right, bottom, and top. So if I say padding left, we could notice that the left space was too small. This one will make it 10 pixels again. So if I refresh, so we expect something to change between the C and then the edge of the box here. You see some padding, the inner space has been added. Also, I can see that the space, which is the outer space here, the outer space of the heading 1 box, and then the outer space of it here at the right side are very tiny compared to the in relation with the other elements. You can see the two are actually touching each other at the other side. So there are actually so many elements here touching each other, which makes it difficult to see. So if I set some margin at the left side of the box and another margin at the right side, it should actually push it away from the others. So if I set margin right to 10 pixels again, and the margin left to another 10 pixels. So if we refresh, we should see that now the box actually is detached from the other elements around it, so making it stand alone. So this is a very nice and very interesting concept. So going back to the padding, we set the padding at the left side, and if you look at the space between the top and then the bottom, we could see the space is a bit small. So what I mean is the padding top and the padding bottom are small. We could try to increase them. So we'll go ahead and do padding top 20 pixels, padding bottom also 20 pixels. So by doing that, we should now give more space to the elements. So this is very interesting, right? This is a very interesting principle you can use in designing. So if I go back and then disable our universal element here, we could see that the beauty of our document has been improved. We are getting more space. So the next thing we also need to look at about the box is this thing I just enabled or disabled, which is the border itself. So it means basically every single element has a border. So, and we could see these borders here. So can we also affect these borders? For example, I just did hide it by default. I disabled it and it went out. So it means by default these borders are hidden. That's why we don't see them. So it means at some point too, we could decide to show the borders or hide the borders. So in our case, we made all our elements to display their borders. So if I come on the heading one we are actually touching, and I decide to be like, okay, the border should be none, what happens? You see, the border goes. So we can actually also manipulate these borders. And the same thing goes with the borders. We could now decide to manipulate the border top, border right, border bottom, and left. So if I say border, and with the borders, and I'm very careful here, I'm trying to make sure I don't complicate the various rules I'm using, because I also want you to be learning them one by one. So I'm actually keeping it as simple as possible. So some of these rules, I'm just writing them to illustrate, not necessary for you to learn the rule. I'm not actually explaining the various rules, how they work, how they are defined. For now, I just want you to stick with the basics and just understand the principles we are talking about. So I'm going to affect the border left star, and make it dotted. So you can see at the left side, the border star has changed into dotted. So I could do the same thing, border right star dashed, then border bottom star groove, and we could add the border top star to solid. So solid is the default if you don't set the border star. So you can see this has been affected. You can see the various behaviors of the box, their borders. So that's interesting. So we could also decide to hide one. So let's say I do here none. So you see, it also goes. There's no star for it, therefore it won't even show up. So we could also decide to say border bottom none, simply as that. So this is one thing. So one, we could display it, we can change its star, we can also hide it, or we can also decide to change its thickness. So I will say border bottom width, then I will change it into, let's say, 5 pixels. So this is the width of the border bottom. So you see it becomes thicker. So this is an interesting concept when it comes to CSS, and this is as the whole principle around the margins, the borders of the box that contains every single element is termed the model box. So surely you meet this term in your career as a web developer, and over time you'll be able to master these basic principles, which are the margins, the add-ins, and the borders of the model box of every element you are working with on your pages. So the next thing I would like us to look at is the display of these elements. So we could notice that all the elements are by default shown, right? So, and we have the display by default, which is either inline or block. So can we also manipulate this display? Yeah, it is possible to manipulate it. So for now, what I'm going to do is I will disable okay, let me keep it the border for now, just to demonstrate. If we look at our elements, our navigation elements here, we have the home, about, and so for now these elements are displayed as this, and because they are displayed as this because they are inline. So what if you wanted a vertical menu where we have the home here, the about here, and so, and they will display vertically like this, but we still want to use the A's as elements, because after all we only have A if we want to make links. But sometimes we get vertical menus, especially if you go on e-commerce website. You see in general the menu is here, and you have the products in this area like this. So how can we change that display from inline to this? So like this. So the only way to do that is to target the element. So we'll target the element is, so we set the selector to A, and then we write the rule by using the keyword display. And we know by default the A element is displayed as inline, so we just have to change that into a block. So we are actually shifting it. And now let's preview and see. So you see now with the box displayed, the box borders displayed, you can see the various boxes changing from inline to being block. As soon as they became block, they suck each other next to them to the next line. So they actually force the next element to go to the next line, and that's what gives us that idea of them following each other vertically instead of being horizontally. So since we've learned a bit of the margin stuff, so and we know now every element, now we just made it as a box, so I can decide to affect the margin bottom to space them a little bit and see. So margin bottom of all the elements should be like some 2 pixels. And we see, you see, it shifts them a little bit. So that looked too small. Let me make it 10 again. So you can see the spaces around them are created very well. So what if I also change the margin left and right so that I get some spaces there, 10 pixels again, margin right, another 10 pixels, so that they are actually freed from the rest. And we can see that we could also decide to affect their paddings. So I'm going to use what we call the shorthand. I'll just write padding, and I want to affect all of them. So it means the paddings of all sides, left and right bottom, should be 10 pixels. And we get this. So you can see this can be used in designing anything you want. These are the basic principles. I'm repeating again. These are the basic principles of designing on web pages. So we've seen we can change elements into block. There's also a way of changing elements from block to inline. So if I take any of these elements, let's say this welcome and so if we look at the HTML code, the welcome is in heading 1. And okay, so let me take these ones here, which are the divs. So they are right now in the block element because the div is a block element. So we can see product 1, product 2, product 3. So if you look at the result on the page, you can see that they are actually displayed as blocks. So you can see the blocks very well. So if I want to change them, I want the product 1 to be here, the product 2 to be here, and 3, and so. So I can decide to change their display. So I will go and target them in my CSS again. So I'll zoom out. So collapse this. So under the heading 1, I'm going to target the div and then write the rule that the display should change into inline. So by doing that, we can see they become product 1 next to product 2 and so on. So they automatically change into inline. So these two shape shifting is possible with CSS. So we change the natural nature of the elements from either being block or inline, and there are other ways of displaying that we will see over time. I don't want to make it too big, and so there are other ways of changing the display, so such as inline block, flex, grid, and so on, which we'll see in the next lesson. So the other thing I would like to underline in this lesson again is what we call the positioning. So right now, like I said earlier, the elements are positioned next to each other. So they flow one after the other. But it is not new that we could see designs where we see elements positioned like this. So we could see elements like this aligned next to each other, although they are blocks. And also sometimes you could see some things floating at the bottom of a web page like this, and allowing you to close it, like usually accept the terms or accept the cookies and so on. So we could see things flying away. They don't always have to float. I mean, they don't always have to flow one next to each other like we are seeing it here. So we can take something out of its context and then kind of push it somewhere far away and so on. Also, if we look at Landscore's website and you scroll, you can see that the navigation here is standing, doesn't move. So by default, these are elements that are also aligned like the others, like in this case, this CSS model box. Imagine scrolling it and just having it to stand and it doesn't move. So we can actually take an element out of its position and actually move it to another position. So there's this CSS principle called the positioning. So we've seen the displays, but we can also change the position. So how do we do that? So the positioning, by default, every single element has a position called static. So by default, the position is static. So we can change that natural position into many other positions. So how do we do that? Let's assume we target our heading one here, which contains our title CSS model box. So we'll target it again. I think we already have it targeted here. So we'll go back inside, and at the end of it, we'll try to work on its position. So we'll do position. And if I write static like this, nothing will change. It will be its own. Now, if I go and change this position from static to, let's say, sticky, like this, nothing also changes. So the thing with this position is that I actually decided to say, okay, this document, its position, I mean this element, which is the heading one, its position should be relative to the main document, the whole document. So actually gave it the whole document as space to live in, but I did not set where exactly it should live on the document. So it stays there and waits for me. So let's assume I add now that at the top side of it, it should be, and from the beginning, which is at the top edge here, it should hang at the top edge here. So if I refresh, nothing happens, but as soon as I start scrolling, you can see it won't go beyond that space. It won't go beyond that limit, which is the 0. It shouldn't pass that. So that's what I actually said it, and you can see that principle is used by so many websites in the web world, I mean in the web. So it is a very nice principle. So we also have other positioning such as absolute and relative. So these things are a bit tough to understand, to explain at this level. I don't want to overcomplicate, but I just use this sticky principle to show to you that it is possible we can shift it. So the other positioning such as relative yes, and absolute can also be used. So if I change this into absolute, for example, so it will make the object fly, and you see it's just hanging on top. So it goes out of the flow. So you can see that it has left its normal position, which is a little bit before the navigation, and then it's just flying on top. So once that's done, we can use the top, left, bottom, and margin left and right to position it wherever we want exactly. So for example, if I set the bottom to 0, right to 0, so let's see what we get. You see, it takes the object somewhere at the bottom. So you might expect it to come right at the bottom here. So no, it depends, because the absolute position removes the object from its normal flow and makes it depend on the nearest static object. So that is this is another topic, and in more of advanced CSS that we'll probably have the chance to explore. But I just want you to have an idea that these things are there and they can be used to in affecting the elements position and how we can use that game to actually design our websites. So this is the end of this lesson, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much, and see you in next lesson, day 10.